Brian Lewis's The Sargon Legend, published from the American Schools of Oriental Research, said that the Sargon story lacks any obvious grammatical, lexicographical, or philological feature that would allow a precise dating. Lewis offers the suggestion that the story was written in the reign of Sargon II, a much later king who was possibly a usurper, to legitimate his own rule. In favor of a late date of the Sargon story are Neo-Assyrian orthographic forms, idiomatic expressions attested only in a later period, and the mention of cutting roads with bronze or copper picks. In any event, there is no satisfactory reason to propose borrowing or fictionalization in either direction.
Moses is known as the lawgiver, the giver of the Ten Commandments, the Mosaic Law. However, the idea of a law being passed from God to a prophet up on a mountain is also a very old motif. Moses is just another lawgiver in a long line of lawgivers in mythological history. In India, Manu was the great lawgiver. In Crete, Minos ascended Mount Dicta, where Zeus gave him the sacred laws, while in Egypt there was Meses, who carried stone tablets and upon them the laws of God were written.
Acharya S. is our source that notes the similarities between Moses, Manu, Minos, and Meses. As usual, these claims cannot be supported by credible or primary sources. Acharya's source is Deceptions and Myths of the Bible by Lloyd Graham, published in 1991. This book is also a terrible reference which has no original source material. Even skeptic author Michael Lido, who originally used Graham's book, agrees. Graham's Deceptions and Myths of the Bible, I will concede, is a terrible source. Once I discovered how bad the source was, I had to edit the book prior to publishing. Regarding the Meses and Moses connection, the skeptic author Michael Lido says, I will not argue the Meses story. I do not like it myself.
And as far as the Ten Commandments, they are taken outright from spell 125 in the Egyptian Book of the Dead.
Spell 125, the earliest collection, dates from 1580 to 1350 BC. It is therefore reasonable to suggest that the Ten Commandments predate spell 125, given that the Pentateuch has been dated to belong to approximately 1400 BC. However, plagiarism cannot be proven in either direction. Perhaps it would be more relevant to note the major differences between the two. The Ten Commandments represent a concise, positive instruction from God to man and the life he should lead. Spell 125 represents a countless disarray of negative protests by the already dead. Throughout history, ancient civilizations have defined right and wrong, good and evil. Nevertheless, all modern and ancient societies have maintained some standard of law or code of which there is much overlap and similarities between variations throughout history. As the Apostle Paul wrote, For when the Gentiles, which do not have the law, do by nature the things contained in the law, these, not having the law, are a law to themselves, which show the work of the law written in their hearts, their conscience also bearing witness, and their thoughts the meanwhile accusing or else excusing one another.
Justin Martyr, one of the first Christian historians and defenders, as far as he was concerned, the devil did it. The devil had the foresight to come before Christ and create his characteristics in the pagan world.
Justin Martyr, the early Christian defender, was raised in a pagan home and was familiar with Greek philosophy. All these passages suggest that Justin Martyr is simply attempting to convince skeptical pagan audiences by parallels that would be familiar and communicable to them. He was also attempting to convince the Roman emperor that Christian teachings and claims were not that different from other religions that enjoyed Rome's protection, while Christians were being persecuted and killed for their beliefs. J. Gresham Machen, a New Testament professor at Princeton Theological Seminary, stated, when Justin Martyr refers to the birth of Perseus as a birth from or through a virgin, he is going beyond what the pagan sources contained. There seems to be no clear evidence that pagan sources used the word virgin as referring to mothers of heroes, mythical or historical, who were represented as being begotten by the gods. Zeitgeist claims that the devil had the foresight to come before Christ and create these characteristics in the pagan world is yet another obvious misinterpretation of the text. Justin Martyr wrote, From what has been already said, you can understand how the devils, in imitation of what was said by Moses, asserted that Proserpine was the daughter of Jupiter. and instigated the people to set up an image of her under the name of Korah. For as we wrote above, Moses said, "In the beginning God made the heaven and the earth was without form and unfurnished, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters." In imitation, therefore, of what is here said of the Spirit of God moving on the waters, they said that Proserpine, or Coral, was the daughter of Jupiter, and in like manner also they craftily feigned that Minerva was the daughter of Jupiter, not by sexual union, but, knowing that God conceived and made the world by the Word, they say that Minerva is the first conception, which we consider to be very absurd, bringing forward the form of the conception in a female shape. Hence, Justin did not argue that demons or the devil copied Christian beliefs beforehand, as Zeitgeist claims. Rather, they copied the older Jewish beliefs and prophecies about Jesus found in the Old Testament. In another place, Justin says, "And these things were said both among the Greeks and among all nations, where they, the demons, heard the prophets foretelling that Christ would specially be believed in, but that in hearing what was said by the prophets, they did not accurately understand it, but imitated what was said of our Christ. Like men who are in error, we will make plain." If Zeitgeist wants to cite Justin Martyr as an historical reference, it cannot be denied that Justin knew these parallels were hardly parallels at all, because he affirms that the greatest distinction of Jesus, his crucifixion, was not copied by the pagan myths, as Zeitgeist alleges. He said, "But in no instance, not even in any of those called sons of Jupiter, Zeus, did they imitate the being crucified. For it was not understood by them, all the things said of it having been put symbolically." Justin also notes that no proof is offered for the Greek gods, because they were mythical, but Jesus was a historical person. He says, "But those who hand down the myths which the poets have made, adduce no proof to the youths who learn them, and we proceed to demonstrate that they have been uttered by the influence of the wicked demons, to deceive and lead astray the human race."
Furthermore, is there any non-biblical historical evidence of any person living with the name Jesus, the son of Mary, who traveled about with 12 followers, healing people and the like? There are numerous historians who lived in and around the Mediterranean, either during or soon after the assumed life of Jesus. How many of these historians document this figure? Not one. However, to be fair, that doesn't mean defenders of the historical Jesus haven't claimed the contrary. 4 historians are typically referenced to justify Jesus' existence. Pliny the Younger, Suetonius, and Tacitus are the first 3.
Unlike these mythical deities, the documentation for a historical Jesus is actually more compelling than the documentation for other ancient figures like Confucius and Buddha. Peter Joseph makes several false statements here. First of all, none of these historians mentioned were defenders of the historical Jesus. They were secular or non-Christian sources. In consideration of the lack of attention paid by the ancient Greco-Roman world to the humble beginnings of Christianity and Jesus being a Jewish figure in a remote location on the eastern frontier of the Roman Empire, and was therefore of little interest to the Roman historians writing Roman literature, there is a considerable amount of historical evidence that confirms his existence. There are not just 4 historical references for Jesus' existence, as Zeitgeist boldly alleges, but in fact, 42 authors mention Jesus within 150 years of his life. On the contrary, only 10 authors mention Tiberius Caesar, the Roman emperor during Jesus' ministry within 150 years of his life. If liberal scholars applied the same arbitrary standard of rejection of historical evidence to other ancient historical personages besides Jesus, such as Julius Caesar or Alexander the Great, they would be forced to reject all history as myth. It is for this reason the brilliant historian F.F. Bruce wrote, "The historicity of Christ is as axiomatic for an unbiased historian as the historicity of Julius Caesar." Tacitus was governor of Asia in AD 112 and was known as the greatest historian of ancient Rome. In his Annals of Imperial Rome, Tacitus wrote about Emperor Nero's persecution of the Christians. He says, "To suppress therefore the common rumor, Nero procured others to be accused and inflicted exquisite punishments upon those people who were in abhorrence for their crimes and were commonly known as Christians. They had their denomination from Christus, Christ, who in the reign of Tiberius was put to death as a criminal by the procurator Pontius Pilate.